Well, welcome everybody. Tonight we're going to talk about the Salty Dog Downeast Rally, which will run from Hampton, Virginia to Newport, Rhode Island, and on to Rockland, Maine. The purpose of tonight's discussion is really not to go into a lot of the nitty-gritty of it, but just try to give you a feel for what we have in mind in terms of an itinerary, some of the fun things along the way, and to get a bit of a sense of what it is to participate in a rally. This program is available to anyone that wants to tune in. It'll be easy to find on YouTube. Most of our webinars are for members and those that pay a fee. But in this particular case, since we really are reaching out to the general community, we like to make it available to as many as we possibly can. So with that in mind, let me get started. I'm going to share my screen. Okay, so Bennett, am I showing my screen okay?
How to unmute. Looks great.
Okay, terrific. All right, well, this is what's going to follow will be a review of some of the details of what we have planned. Hopefully, I can whet your appetite on visiting Maine. I'm Bob Osborne. I'm president of Salty Dog and also rally director. I also have a soft spot in my heart for Antigua, and so I serve as port officer down there. So tonight we're going to talk about the upcoming rally that begins at the very beginning of July, and we'll position people up in Maine to cruise for the summer, as well as perhaps go on to the Canadian Maritimes. While I'm rally director, Jen and Adam are going to be the rally managers, and they're going to be your guide. They always dress like this. I don't know why. They're always very fancy,
Every
but
night. Every night.
occasionally they do get behind the boat to excuse me behind their the helm of Soulmate. They've just spent the last 2 seasons cruising in the Caribbean, and they've been really helpful in meeting, helping people get together. And we really emphasized really the community of sailing within Salty Dog, as well as the nuts and bolts of planning a passage. Neither one of them have actually been to Maine before, so this will be new for them. But I think their ability to provide a glue to hold the fleet together is really the most important thing. So I will remain involved, as will Bennett, who is also involved in this call to answer questions. And of course, you can reach out to me at any time, bob@saltydogsailing.org. So here's the itinerary. Basically, we'll have on June 11th, that's tonight, we have a briefing, followed by our first official event, which will be at Bull Island Brewery down in Hampton, Virginia, and a weather briefing July 3rd at 5 p.m. Bull Island is right adjacent to the city marina. It's a really nice place, and I was just talking to the manager today. They're excited to have us come to their pub. We also did the departure briefing there for our Del Melwa rally that just finished about a week ago. Now, somewhere between July 4th and 5th, the plan is to depart for Newport, and we'll talk more about that in a minute. Then we have a rendezvous at the International Yacht Restoration School, perhaps a tour. It's a really neat place, a potluck at BYOB at 5 o'clock on the 8th. There'll be other activities while we're in Newport for a couple of days, including a tour of Fort Adams, a bike ride, things like that. About the 11th, we're going to head off to Cuttyhunk for a night, just a quick visit, because it's not too far from the canal, and then head a weather briefing, and then also on the 13th, a departure for Rockland. So the run from Hampton to New York is 350 miles, so it's basically 2 nights and 3 days to get from here to there. And we'll be talking about weather as we get closer, as I mentioned. For some of you, it may be your first multi-night offshore run. There's a lot of activity between Hampton and Newport with the entrance to the Delaware River and also approaches to New York. So it's a very busy place. So you want to be on your best behavior and keeping track. But with the prevailing winds generally from the southwest, it should be a nice run. It'll take you to the west of Block Island, which you can see here at the bottom of the screen, and then pass right by Point Judith and then up right into Newport. Newport is a really beautiful place. It has tremendous history. There's spectacular homes. This was a private home at one point, but now it is an inn overlooking Narragansett Bay. The New York Yacht Club has its harbor court there. If you're a member, you can visit, or if you're lucky enough to know a member. It was the home of the Brown family, of which Brown University was formed. They made their money in the, oddly enough, opium trade. One of my favorite areas in downtown Newport is Bannister's Wharf. And when we get closer to departure, we'll talk about some of those very convenient dinghy docks right in the heart of Newport. But it is a beautiful place, and rarely is it vacant like this. There's a lot of amazing boats in Newport Harbor. A few weeks ago, I actually moved a 115-foot schooner from Newport up to New Bedford for some work. But there's just some amazing boats, and it just to even be through the harbor to see these is pretty spectacular. If you're a tennis fan, there's the International Tennis Hall of Fame, which is quite amazing. I guess it's back from the 1940s. It's quite original, and you can actually arrange to play tennis there if you choose to. For those of you that are into sailing like me, there's the Sailing Museum, and that's really interesting. That's right downtown. But of course, nothing really beats just gazing around the harbor, whether you're going around by dinghy or in your boat. It's pretty amazing. And there's tons of moorings, but there's also opportunities to anchor. You'll see the areas circled in black. I've actually only taken a mooring occasionally in Newport, just because I prefer to spend my money on beer. But you do not want to try to get use a marina. It's just tremendously expensive for $5 a foot. Fortunately, when you cruise down the East Coast or into the Caribbean, it's a whole lot cheaper than that. So we're going to have some arrival events in Rockland. The assumption would be they'll get there about the 14th of July. You can either anchor or pick up a mooring. Whichever you prefer. The moorings are not terribly expensive, and they're certainly convenient to the dinghy dock. On the 15th, we'll have a happy hour at the Rock Harbor Pub. That's just right downtown in Main Street. It's a nice little casual pub. And on the 16th, at the Sail Power and Steam Museum, we'll be having a pizza party, and very informal. They have a big tent, so if it's raining, it's okay, and you can actually anchor in that neighborhood as well if you choose to, or it's a 10-minute walk from town. Beginning on the 17th, we'll be heading off on a mini cruise, going from Pulpit Harbor to Belfast, Bucks Harbor, and Brooklyn, Maine. And I'll go into some more detail momentarily, but basically we're trying to give you a flavor for kind of the rural, small cities, things like that, and a tour of an amazing custom boatyard. As you make your crossing up in Maine, hopefully you'll be able to see whales, and I'll talk more about where that might happen. But before we get to that slide actually is not where I wanted it. But in any event, the first day's run from Newport to Cuttyhunk is about 20 miles. It's a pretty easy run, again, with that prevailing southwest wind. And that will position us to be within a reasonable distance of the canal. And I can talk more about that in a second. Cuttyhunk is a really charming island at the very bottom of the Elizabeth Islands, adjacent to Martha's Vineyard. See the boats out in the bight. That's a place to either anchor or pick up a mooring, but most people choose to get into the harbor itself and to get a mooring. That's what I always do. It's really tight. Your stern will be 10 feet from the boat behind you, but the moorings are well done, and it's totally worth it. It's a really unique experience. There is a spot you can anchor in Cuttyhunk, but it is tight. And I can tell you at least once I've seen boats that came up on the beach after they dragged in that harbor because it's fairly shallow. But the basin is 10 feet deep, and there's loads of room. There's also plenty of moorings out in the area outside the harbor. The charts are well marked, but be aware that there's things that go bump if you're not careful. So honor the buoys.
Hey,
From
Bob,
Cuttyhunk, yeah.
just a quick one. Is there a size limit? I know we have one boat over 50 feet. I
No, I
think
think up to 60 or so is probably
Great,
fine. I
great.
could check. That's a good question, but I've never it's never really been a problem. Some of the moorings are a little further apart. And it's a first come, first bird, first served basis, and that's a good question, Adam. So you have a choice. We'll be there for 2 days. You can spend one day touring the island. The hiking is great. The view from the top is pretty spectacular, and there's some old World War II pillbox up on the cliffs. So it's about 20 miles to the canal. The canal floods with the bay. So as the tide is coming in to Newport and to Buzzards Bay, it floods to the east towards Maine. And so just keep that in mind. But just inside that entrance is a small harbor called Onset, and you can get in there and anchor off to the left of the entrance. But it is not for the faint of heart as you come in at night. So I wouldn't recommend you do that. But if you want to come in and stage for the following morning, that's fine. What with the tides are going to be flooding early, so we're going to want to leave Cuttyhunk pretty early. Sometimes there can be tremendously thick fog, and I would hope all of you would have radar. That's pretty important. The Massachusetts Maritime Academy is in the canal, and you may see the Enterprise, which is their training ship. And I've always loved going through the canal. The sights are pretty amazing. Once you're in the canal, it's very well lit. You can easily transit at night. I've done that. But there's nothing to worry about in terms of vertical clearance. The only bridge that would matter is up all the time, except when there's a garbage train going by, and that's well planned ahead of time. So from Cape Cod to Rockland is 150 miles. It's an overnight. You leave early in the morning from the canal. The tide runs really fast, 5 knots or so through the canal, so you can't go against it. The rules are you have to be under power, and it'd probably be no wind anyway. Hold on for a second. Back again. Let me snooze this here. Okay, sorry about that. So you'll be leaving the canal in the early morning, and you'll be arriving in Maine the next morning. There's the whales again. I guess I had that in twice. And the most common whale you see up there are humpbacks. They're the most typical, and there's loads of them. And there's also plenty of fishing boats. This happens to be a sword fishing boat, but one way or the other, there's a lot of activity out in the Gulf. As you cross it, just as you go north of Cape Cod is where you're most likely to see whales. And as you approach, there's lots of different buoys that you can favor one way or the other, but the route that I generally take is to go east of Matinic as you come close to the coast of Maine, and then follow your way up around. Some people will go inside what they call Muscle Ridge. Could you mute yourself, please? But it's pretty easy passage. One thing to keep in mind, it's entirely possible it will be very foggy when you get here. So pick a route ahead of time that you're comfortable with, plot a course, and understand that you maybe have 100-foot visibility as you're coming through this. Another thing to keep in mind as you go up this way is there are literally hundreds, if not thousands, of lobster boats. They generally don't have AIS, and they generally aren't paying real close attention to who's around them. They just move from spot to spot. And as you can see in this photo, there's a lot of buoys. In some places, there's many more than this. So they may be very well going along and then turn 90 degrees and head right across your bow. So you want to keep that in mind, especially if it's really foggy. There are many beautiful lighthouses in Maine. As you round the corner coming up to Rockland, you'll see Owl's Head Light. And legend has it that during the age of sail, at any one point, as many as 70 schooners and small sailboats will go by Owl's Head Light in the course of a single day. Rockland is a really easy entrance. It's a huge, long breakwater. It's about a mile long. You enter obviously here, uh, and over in this general neighborhood here is where the town dock is. To the north part is where the ferries come in and leave, and then down here at this side at the bottom of the screen is a place where you can also anchor. But anchoring is pretty convenient. The one thing to keep in mind, if you anchor off of what we call the cement factory, which are these great big tall cement silos, you might want to consider putting a sentinel on your anchor, because there's a lot of crap there. And one year I picked up an old steel hawser, and I had a really tough time getting it off. Of course, that was just one out of probably 20 visits I've had to Rockland. But if you're going to anchor, it's an old, very well used harbor, so it's not a bad idea to put a sentinel out. I generally don't recommend sentinels because people can ride over them and really tangle you up. But in that case, this probably does make sense. And at the entrance to the breakwater is a really pretty lighthouse. This is a rather fuzzy picture, but it's quite spectacular to go by. But I really think the most important thing to keep in mind about all this is the community. You know, once you've arrived, you're part of a kind of a club. And this was a picture that I took or someone took for me a couple of years ago when we were visiting Maine with the fleet. Unfortunately, I won't be there this year because I am my boat Pandora is undergoing a pretty major refit in Trinidad. And that's a story for another night. That's my first time to be to Trinidad. And I have to tell you, it's pretty impressive. The work level is really excellent there. So the area that you'll likely be cruising much of the time you're in Maine is really from Rockland over here on the left to Bar Harbor here on the right. And you could spend the entire season doing nothing but cruising this general area and not run out of places to go. And I'll be sharing information about a cruising guide in just a second, but our cruise will carry us basically in this western part of the bay. And you can easily spend weeks, if not the entire season, and never leave that area. In particular, to get a handle on what's available in Maine, the Cruising Club of America has put together a wonderful and free resource for cruising. And they have such things as, okay, you're going to be going away for a week. Here's what we recommend you do. And you'll pick some of the same harbors that we use. But it's well worth it. It's free, and definitely it's something to take a look at. And speaking of taking a look at online things, many of our boats now have Starlink. If you don't, I would look into getting it. One of the nice things about it is you can turn it on and off 1 month at a time. But the key point about Starlink is when you get to an area like Maine where cell service can be really spotty, it gives you 24/7 access to make phone calls, because you'll find once you get east of Rockland, further east you go until you get, say, to Bar Harbor, you will be points in which you won't have any cell coverage at all. It's quite a rural area, so keep that in mind. There are other guides available. There's the waterway guide, which I would recommend you take a look at as well. It complements the Maine cruising guide. And the cruising guide to the Maine coast is a good resource, but I don't think that the new edition has come out recently. It was the thing to use for decades, but it's often called the Taft Guide. Maybe you could buy a used copy, or I'm not sure what the current edition looks like. But I talked earlier about the whole issue of lobster pots. And if you don't have a warp cutter on your boat, you probably should put one, whether it's the spurs in the upper right, or what's called a shaft shark, or any of the other kinds that go on right on the propeller. The benefit of the one at the bottom is you can put it on even when the boat's in the water. Just have a diver put it on it goes on with a couple of Allen screws. I'm not advocating that you want to cut the lobster pots that these guys use to make a living, but the point is, with 60-degree or 55-degree water, if you wrap one, you're going to go swimming. And with these warp cutters, they will cut it, and you can go on your way. There's a big difference between the spurs at the top and the other style. The Spurs has a stationary cutter and one that spins with a propeller. So in a single revolution, it cuts the warp. The other kind, it has to wrap around a couple of times before it gets tight enough to be cut. So that means you've got a wad of crud on the back of your propeller that you have to pull off. But it's usually pretty easy to get it off with, say, a boat hook or something. For me, it's the biggest opportunity here is to avoid going swimming. And if you don't already have one, I would get at least a shorty wetsuit, if not a full wetsuit. It doesn't have to be super thick because you won't be in the water all that long, but it is just too cold to spend 10 or 15 minutes in the water trying to untangle something. And another thing to keep in mind in Maine is it has tremendous tides. The further east you get, the tides get higher, but an 8, 10, 12-foot tide is not uncommon. This obviously is low tide, but at high tide, obviously looking at the height of those docks, that they're expecting to be able to unload their lobster pots at high tide. So when you anchor in Maine, and often moorings are convenient, but if you anchor, you got to think hard about what does my area look like with 10 feet less water than there is right now. So keep in mind as you consider where you're going. The scenery is amazing, and because there's so many things that go bump in the night, so many rocks, so many things you can crash into. There's a lot of lighthouses, and if you enjoy them like I do, you're going to want to take pictures of them, and really, it's just wonderful. You may see some of these guys, although this is not their current style boat, but this is Outward Bound. It's a program that helps kids become more independent. Their newer boats look a little different than this, but they still go out for a week or 2 weeks at a time. They row or sail everywhere and live off the land. And then, of course, we've all heard about the dude schooners in Maine, and there's just quite spectacular. One of the areas we're going to visit, and I'll talk about that in just a second, is Pulpit Harbor, which is a very popular spot for them to anchor the last or the first night of a week-long cruise. And that brings me to the discussion about the mini cruise. Now, the whole point of our mini cruise is to give you a feel for Maine. Of course, many of you have already been there before, but for those that have not, the first stop of Rockland is one of the largest cities in Maine. The second stop, which shows as #1 here, is Pulpit Harbor, and that is extremely rural. You come in around a narrow opening, and it's a wonderful area to anchor, and you go towards the back of the harbor and anchor there. And at the very end of the harbor, over here on the right, is a dinghy dock, and you can cross this little bridge and go up to a supermarket, and there's an airport up there with a beautiful view. So it gives you a sense of some of like old Maine. This is a picture of Pulpit Rock that in the entrance to Pulpit Harbor, and one of the schooners coming. I think that's Heritage. There have been osprey nests on this for hundreds and hundreds of years, and it's a pretty spectacular spot. Obviously, you don't want to bump into it. One of the interesting things about these schooners is none of them have engines. It has to do with Coast Guard requirements, so they all carry a push boat, and it's fun to watch them. They come in under sail, they anchor, and then they drop their sails. If there's no wind, then they use their push boat, which they deploy while they're sailing or floating around, drop it in the water, and immediately use it to push the boat around. It's pretty impressive to see. So for day 2, we're going to go up to Belfast, and Belfast is an old-time city in Maine. It used to be the center of chicken production for many, many years, and they had huge chicken farms up there. They're gone now. They also had a major sardine packing facility, which is no longer used. It's now a really, really top-end boatyard called Front Street Shipyard, where they service some of the most spectacular yachts anywhere. But it's a fun place to visit. You have to take a mooring. I suppose there's a little room to anchor, but it's not very practical. Ideally, you want to get a mooring up towards the head of the harbor. But this is where the city dock is, and there's a bunch of fun bars and restaurants all the way up the hill that have beautiful views. It's a very pretty place. Really looks sort of like classic New England. I think it's just gorgeous. And I picked this place in particular because Jen said she didn't want to cook on board every night, and so this is a place to go out and enjoy Maine cuisine.
Hey, watch it, Bob. Jen's a very good cook.
No, she just said she didn't want to cook that night. So, okay, so we'll be there. And then the next day, we're going to head over to Bucks Harbor, which is that'd be point number 4. And that is a very charming little place that we've tried to visit on a regular basis. But I do want to talk before we get to Bucks Harbor a little bit about the weather. That the adage in Maine is if you don't like the weather, wait 10 minutes. And so sometimes you'll be sailing along, it'll be bright and sunny, then a thunderstorm will come through. You'll end up with a little bit of light fog or a little bit more fog, or you won't be able to see much of anything. And it changes. Often the mornings are very foggy and foggy at night. It's cool in Maine and the water is quite cold too. So during the day, when the air heats up, and the water's freezing cold, you can get this kind of surface fog. And I've been in Maine for a total of 2-week trips for maybe 15 years in a row. And there were several years when I never even saw anything except when I got my dinghy and went ashore. So prepare yourself to sail without seeing a lot. And if you don't have radar, you can do what the old timers do, and that is bring a sack of potatoes. And you can do what's called navigation by potato. And what that means is as you sail along, you throw potatoes over the bow every few minutes. And when they stop splashing, turn around. So Bucks Harbor is super protected. The little marina is here behind it. They have brand new owners, so I don't know them, but I have spoken to them several times, and they're quite excited about having you visit. There's about 40 to 50 moorings available, and we're arranging to have a lobster bake on their deck. And that'll be kind of interesting. Normally, we try to find a place to do a professionally catered lobster bake, but it's just at $100 a person for paper plates, it just doesn't seem like a good idea. So what we've done a few times now, which works out great, is when you're in Rockland, you're going to go to a fishing supply store and buy a bait bag. And we'll talk a little bit more about that for the skippers as they're planning. The bait bag will be big enough to stick a lobster in, some potatoes, some ears of corn, and then the folks at Bucks Harbor Marine will supply a pot that they can cook them in for you, and then you eat on picnic
All right,
tables.
hold on, let me.
Kind of
check this.
a BYO thing. They sell wine and beer in their store. It's a really fun kind of down east sort of activity. So that takes us to the final trip, and that's another whopping 8-mile trip down to Brooklyn, Maine, down Eggemoggin Reach. And they call it the Reach because it's perpendicular to the prevailing winds. And anytime you go, you can sail one way or the other. If there's wind, you can sail to the northwest or the southeast pretty easily. And I'm arranging for a tour of the Brooklyn Boatyard. Brooklyn Boatyard was started by the son of E.B. White, and you may recognize that name. He was the poet who wrote, or the author that wrote Charlotte's Web. And it's now second generation. Steve White is a super nice guy and has agreed to give everyone a tour. That's going to be on Saturday, the 21st. They've done some amazing boats. They're specialists in cold mold building, and some composites, but this boat is made out of wood, and it's called Sunny 2. And as you can see, it's a big boat. But when I was there years ago, Aphrodite was there, and to see that boat, that's an 80-foot commuter. She's owned by someone that keeps her in Watch Hill, Rhode Island. A pretty spectacular boat, pretty amazing. This boat, when it was new, was used by someone to commute into New York City every morning. So hopefully this is giving you a feel for what it's like to cruise in Maine. This is going to be, as we finish up the cruise down in Brooklyn, this is the view. And pretty much like that every day, except of course when there's so much fog that you can't see your hand in front of your face. But Maine is amazing. I can talk all day about it. I've been there 15 times and can't wait to go back. But right now I'm without a boat. So that's kind of it. Let's see. It shows my email. Actually, I should change that. Bob@saltydogsailing.org. And it says 2021. I forgot to change the slide. So in any event, those pictures, a lot of them are brand new, but there was a few that are just, I can't stop but using them again and again. So feel free to call me at any time on my number listed below or send me an email. And if you're curious about many of the places in Maine that we have been over the years, if you go to sailpandora.com, there's a search. And if you say, okay, Brooklyn, it'll pop up any posts I've written about Brooklyn or about Castine or Belfast or Merchants Row or Stonington or Rockland, you name it. I've been there and I've written about it. So, but of course, your best source is going to be the Ocean Cruising Club, excuse me, the Cruising Club of America. Don't want to show my bias, but they're a great source of information, and several of my friends are actually editors on that product. So with that in mind, I'm going to get rid of my share. Stop share. I think that should do it. Did I do that right, Bennett?
Unmute again. Yeah, you're looking good.
Okay, great. So, Bennett, would you like to add anything before we open it up for questions?
Um, no, I don't think so. You really covered a lot. I learned a lot. Yeah, I think the questions will probably be very relevant.
Okay, great. Well, I'm also going to encourage anyone that has a question, you can either ask. We don't have that many people here that we can't do that, or you can just pop something up in chat. And while you're thinking of those questions, Gail put up a question. What type and length of scope do you need? I'm going to say type means anchor, perhaps. And Maine, you're almost always anchoring in mud. And so virtually any anchor works. I grew up using a Bruce or a CQR, and they work just fine. The modern anchors, I think, work better. Now I use a spade, or I would also use a CQR or something, but excuse me, not a CQR, a Rockno. Any of those kind of modern anchors, they're great for all kinds of conditions. But Maine is pretty forgiving for anchoring. But the scope would be probably 4 to 5 is enough because everything is so incredibly well protected. So Dean is asking, are there lots of lobster pots along the mini rally you described? Yes, and yes, and yes. Everywhere you go, and if you've ever been into an ice cream place and they put sprinkles on your cereal, on your ice cream, that's the way it looks. It is virtually impossible to not encounter them. The key point about dealing with lobster buoys is that when the tide is coming towards you or you're running with the tide, the warps run parallel to you and they'll probably run right by the side of your boat. If you're crossing the current, and they're doing that quite a bit as you go east up to, say, Bar Harbor, the buoys are sideways to you, which means the warp and their floating lines generally, they go up and arch out, and you're going to pick them up. The biggest challenge of all, though, is the use of what they call toggles. And when we get further along and start talking about the intricacies of going to Maine, we'll show a picture of what that means. But in essence, you have a lobster pot with a long line on it, a small buoy that holds the line up, and about 10 feet after that, the lobster pot buoy itself. Problem is there's so many of them that sometimes the buoy of the one pot and the toggle overlap, and so you can't tell which one belongs to which buoy, and that can be really challenging. So as a rule, you really don't want to be moving through Maine waters in the dark. Now, a question may come to mind, what about offshore? There are buoys offshore. There are lobster pots offshore. They often are in water a couple of 100 feet deep, but the lines are hanging much more straight down. So it would be unlikely that you will snag one. However, there are because it's foggy in Maine, they actually in the offshore buoys, they will often put radar reflectors on the top of a pole, and you might find you bang into one of those in the dark without even seeing it. I suppose that might be more of an issue on a catamaran, but it'll pop up and come out from behind you. So I would look seriously into getting getting some sort of a cutter. But just don't tell the lobstermen you've done it because they get pretty annoyed. Let's see. How was one deal?
Can I add something?
Uh-huh.
So the first question about the scope, just remember that if you are actually going further east, as you start to get into Bay of Fundy area, the tides get even higher. And when you're up really far, those are the biggest tides. So, you really have to add more to your thinking as the further east you go.
And the further, if you go far up into the Bay of Fundy, and correct me if I'm wrong, Bennett, but you probably don't even want to anchor. You want to take a mooring because it's really hard to anchor with a 40-foot tide. Because at high
Yeah,
tide, you have
I think like
48
28 to
feet.
30 is
It's really
28 to
tough.
30 is about the biggest I've seen. But
Yeah.
if you're going really far up into Passamaquoddy Bay, that's in the Canadian side of things, then you're seeing 30-foot tides and whole different ballgame.
But don't be intimidated by the whole lobster pot thing. I mean, if you're properly prepared with something to deal with it, if it wraps on your prop, which you really don't want to have happen, it's just a matter of a bump and a bang, and then you're clear. So now there's a question: where do we meet in Hampton? Are there options for anchoring or mooring balls? Do you have any idea what the costs are? Hampton Harbor has room for probably maybe 10 boats to anchor. There's no moorings. And if you get, or if you're there, if you're lucky, you probably can anchor. If you don't want to anchor there, you can anchor in Old Port Comfort, which is just on the other side of the canal bridge, the tunnel bridge. It's a little bit of a dinghy ride, or you take an Uber from there, but it is, I would just go into Hampton and hope for the best. If you want to take a slip, the two options are Blue Water, which is a safe harbor marina. It's more expensive than the town dock. The town dock is great, personally. I really like them. They're extremely friendly, and that's where we're going to have our departure activities down at before departure. So I would contact the city marina and make a reservation. I personally don't tie up in marinas all that often, but I think tying up there is well worth it. Let's see. How does one deal with pots in the dog, especially if you're single-handed? Fog. Um, Go really, really slow so that you can see what's happening in front of you. It also depends upon the kind of boat you have. If you have a boat like mine that has a spade rudder with an exposed propeller in front of it, it can be tricky. If you have an older style full displacement, well, I guess they're all full displacement, but a full keel with an aperture, it's less of an issue. And so what I generally do is when things look dicey, I go super, super slow. And if I find that I can't avoid it, I put the boat in neutral and let it just coast over it. And then you might also want to consider having a second boat hook, just in case you lose the one, trying to pull it off so that you can retrieve it. Always good to have one, and leave it handy right on deck so that you're ready to go. Let's see. Okay, so when we arrive at some location, it's up to you to make reservations for a mooring ball, and we'll be giving you that information in advance. The places you're going to want to reserve a ball, it will be in Belfast and at Bucks Harbor. Rockland, I believe, is first come, first served. I'm not positive about that, but we'll have that information in the skipper information as well.
Bob,
Yeah.
I
Yes.
just wanted to add that in Newport, they're now taking, DACWA's now taking reservations for moorings, and I recommend that, anybody who wants one up there ought to make that DACWA reservation early.
Yes, and keep in mind, Newport, that while there's plenty of room to anchor, it's a very big, very busy harbor. And if you you can't go fast, you have to go slow because they have a very aggressive patrol. But if you have an electric motor, you be aware that you might find yourself in an awkward position because the distances are quite great. So
For anybody who is going, we already reserved at Old Port Marine, which is on Docwa, for a mooring. So if you want, you can get your mooring in Newport already. I'm gonna
Yes.
look into the rest of them that you mentioned, Bob, because I haven't gotten those yet.
That's right. And also there is a Old Port runs a launch service throughout the harbor. I don't know what it costs, probably could be $10 each to go anywhere. But if you're going out to dinner and you don't want to schlep back in the dark, it's a very good way to do it.
So I just want to add that I added, let's see, did I unmute here? Yeah.
No, you're good. You're good.
Okay. I added a couple of mooring facilities that we have used in the past in Newport to the welcome page just a couple hours ago because I didn't realize they weren't on there. But there's Newport moorings. You make a phone call, but they ask not to call too far in advance. It has to be like within the week that you're coming. And then there's a picture of the alternative anchorage. I doubt it's going to be jam packed. I think one year we had it around July 4th. And that was tight, but we shouldn't have to rely on the outer or alternative anchorages.
Yes, so you just answered that question, when to get at moorings. The dinghy registration and numbers and lights, absolutely. Newport, they will nail you if you go shooting around in the dark. Not a good idea. Bennett, do you think that that you need a tricolor or just a white light? I know what the rules are, but what do you think the
Yeah,
implication is?
I actually don't know what the rules are, but I mean, I would recommend, it's nice to have a tricolor. If you're buying one, if you have one already and it's single light, that's fine, in my opinion. But I don't know what the regs are, to be honest with you.
Well, I
They-
think what I would recommend, I mean, I don't carry I don't have a permanently affixed light. I just use one of those tricolors, and when I'm going through the harbor at night, I hold it up like this because I figure it'll get broken for me. But numbers, definitely. No, I don't use numbers on my dinghy except when it's in the U.S.
You mean
Nobody
registration numbers on the dinghy?
registration for Rhode Island or someplace.
Yeah, you should definitely have that everywhere. No question.
They're
They'll-
very aggressive about raising funds by nailing people and giving them fines. That's a good question. So any other questions?
Just to answer the question about what dates would you recommend getting a mooring for at Newport, I reserved July 6th through July 11th. Just
And
to be,
I don't think you have to prepay, do you? Or do you, if you
you
change?
just have to put, they're really flexible about their cancellation and things like that. No, you have to put some sort of deposit in DACWA, but it was pretty minimal.
Well, and I will emphasize that even if you have never been there before, anchoring either on the far side of the Goat Island Causeway, which is the northern part, or over near Ida Lewis Yacht Club. It's very easy. I've been going there for more than 40 years, and I've never gotten there when I couldn't anchor. And you're anchoring in 20 to 25 feet of water. And most of the boats you see anchored, I think they're relatively experienced. People that are less experienced often will take a mooring. And so you're anchoring around people that kind of know what they're doing. I'm not saying that I mean, I've taken moorings plenty of times, but just from a cost standpoint, because they are expensive, I think it's like $70 a day or something. So whatever floats your boat.
So I'll add a couple of things here if I could. The Ida Lewis one is really the preferred anchorage. That's like home. And most people will be able to get in there, I think, anchoring. All the mooring fields are right in the center there. If you get an Old Port mooring, you're going to be right in the middle of the activity. There are other moorings that are up different, little coves that are a little bit outside. And that's where you really do want to have your dinghy to be able to go, half a mile. But if you can get into Ida Lewis, it's really more like around there. It's pretty shallow. It's like 11, 13 feet. And so it's very forgiving. You'll find that it'll be tight. So you really want to make sure that you have enough swing room. It will be tight. No question. Summer is like that.
And speaking of Ida Lewis, if you're a member of a recognized yacht club, they're pretty friendly. You can do reciprocity, and they have a launch service that'll take you to their dock, and then it's a 15-minute walk into town. And they have a nice restaurant. The New York Yacht Club, they're not friendly, unless you're a member of the New York Yacht Club. So you can't just pick up a mooring there. So the question from a 44-foot Antares, 22 feet beam, any issues? No, no, I don't think so. The only advantage you'll have is twice the opportunity to pick up lobster pots. Right,
Yeah.
Adam?
Yeah, I think we have 3 catamarans going. I think we have a 39, a 44, Antares, and then we have Soulmate, which is a 47. But we're gonna watch the lobster pots and see what we can do.
Yes, you'll be fine. I'm just teasing. But in any event, hopefully I've inspired you a little bit. Don't hesitate to reach out. We're going to be starting a WhatsApp group pretty soon for those folks that are in the rally, and so watch your email for that. That's particularly it's funny that thing how quickly things change. 2 years ago, WhatsApp was just barely on the horizon, and in the Caribbean last winter, it was the town hall. Everybody and Jen was really active in helping to keep that moving. So I think you'll find that's a great way to ask questions, and I'll be in that feed as well. So if questions come up along the way, I'll respond to them. So I think you'll enjoy it. Just bring a sweater. It's in the 50s overnight in the morning, but in the afternoons it's 70, 80. And I just can't tell you how wonderful it is. And I will say that if Maine was warm in the winter, I would not go to the Caribbean. I love Maine. I think it's awesome.
But
So
both weeks of summer there.
it would be nice if it were maybe not as hot as the Caribbean sometimes is. Certainly not as hot as Trinidad. Holy crap. But
Oh,
it's hot, but Maine is beautiful. You just can't believe how gorgeous it is. So I think you'll enjoy it. I can't rave enough about it. So thank you to everyone for participating this evening. I'm going to shut off the recording and I'll stick around for a minute or two to see if anybody has any questions.
Excellent.
Oops, where are we here?
Still says recording, Bob.
Yeah, I know. I'm trying to figure out where that went. Okay, here we go. Here we go. Recording, stop recording.